In the heart of Lagos, a billionaire left his mansion and put on rags. He wasn't looking for a business deal or fame. He wanted something money could never buy, true love. But what he found in the hands of a poor woman would change his life forever. Femi Adeni was one of the richest young men in Lagos, living in Banana Island. But with all his wealth, he still felt empty and unloved. He wanted someone who would love him without knowing his name or his money. So he decided to disappear from the world he knew. He moved to Ajagunle, one of the roughest areas in Lagos. His mansion was replaced by a small, hot one-room apartment with a leaking ceiling. He got a job as a cleaner in an office in Ikeja, earning just 25,000 naira per month. Nobody there knew who he really was. One day at the office canteen, he met Ada, the food server. She had a tired face but a beautiful smile that warmed his heart. She treated him like a person, not a poor cleaner. Femi had never felt that kind of kindness before. Femi began to eat at the canteen every afternoon just to see Ada. He didn't say much, but he always greeted her with a small smile. Ada started saving an extra piece of meat just for him. It was the first time Femi felt special, not because of his name, but because of kindness. One day, Ada came late to work, looking worried and weak. Femi noticed she was limping slightly and her eyes looked swollen. She told him her mother had collapsed the night before. Femi's heart ached. He knew how it felt to almost lose someone. That evening, Femi followed her at a distance and saw the condition of her home. The house was almost falling apart, with cracks in the walls and no electricity. Her mother was lying on a mat, barely breathing, but Ada was gently feeding her. Femi turned away and wiped his eyes. This woman had a heart stronger than gold. The next day, Femi sent an envelope of cash under Ada's door without a name. Ada cried when she saw it and thanked God, thinking it was a miracle. She used it to take her mother to the local clinic that same morning. Femi watched from afar, his heart at peace. Femi started spending more time near Ada's home, helping secretly. He bought her medicine anonymously and fixed her door one night. Ada began to call the mystery helper God's angel. Femi smiled in the dark. He'd never felt so good. One of the office supervisors began insulting Femi for being too slow. He poured dirty mop water on the floor again and told Femi to clean it. Femi obeyed quietly, but Ada stood up and scolded the man. That moment, he saw fire in her, and he loved her even more. Ada got a warning letter from HR for talking back. She looked downcast but didn't regret defending Femi. Femi felt guilty and wanted to tell her the truth but feared he'd lose her. So he decided to be by her side no matter what. Days passed and Ada's mother started getting better. She began to walk slowly and even greeted neighbors again. Ada smiled more often, and Femi noticed how beautiful she looked in joy. But deep down, he feared the truth might break everything.
Some female workers stood aside, laughing as Femi mopped the floor with quiet focus. One whispered, "See this poor cleaner, moving like he owns the world." Another wickedly poured a bucket of dirty, foamy water where he had just cleaned. They all laughed, not knowing this poor cleaner was a billionaire in disguise.
Ada invited Femi to her small birthday celebration at home. She had cooked jollof rice, fried plantain, and bought one small bottle of malt. It was the first time Femi celebrated anything without luxury, and it felt more real. They laughed, danced, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. After the party, Ada walked Femi home and they sat outside talking. Ada opened up about how hard life had been since her father died. She said most men only chased her for her body, not her heart. Femi held back tears and whispered, "You deserve more." The next week, Ada was accused of stealing meat from the canteen. The manager shouted at her in front of everyone and suspended her. Ada cried and swore she was innocent, but nobody believed her except for Femi. He stood up in front of the staff and defended her with boldness. Femi was fired for causing disorder. He left the office with his head high while Ada cried behind him. He turned back and told her, "I'll be fine. You just take care of Mama." That night, he slept outside her door, worried she'd be too heartbroken. Ada invited him in and served him leftover food from the party. They sat on the floor in silence, eating together. Femi finally asked, "Would you still talk to me if I was rich?" Ada laughed and replied, "Rich men don't sleep outside my door." That same night, Femi opened his bag and looked at his phone. He had missed over 50 calls from his personal assistant. His company needed him back urgently for a big investor meeting. He stared at Ada, sleeping beside her mother, and turned the phone off. The next morning, Ada wakes up to find Femi sweeping her compound. He had bought akara and bop from a nearby woman and placed it on the table. Ada laughed and said, "Cleaner by day, husband material by heart." Femi blushed and smiled back. Later that day, Femi told Ada he needed to travel for a few days. She looked disappointed but nodded in understanding. He held her hands and said, "No matter what happens, I'll come back." Ada smiled faintly, but her heart was heavy. Femi returned to his mansion in Ikoyi after many weeks. His staff rushed to welcome him, and his PA scolded him for disappearing. He stood in the middle of his luxurious home, but it all felt empty. He missed Ada, her laughter, and her humble world. Femi's mother, Madame Ronke, came to visit him that evening. She wanted to introduce him to a senator's daughter for marriage. Femi shook his head and said, "I've already found someone special." His mother frowned and said, "Who is she?" Femi showed his mother a photo of Ada and said, "She's the one." Madame Ronke's eyes widened in horror. "She's a cleaner?" she shouted. Femi replied, "She's more royal than anyone you've ever introduced to me." Femi returned to Ada's compound 2 days later, dressed in simple clothes. He brought food, medicine, and a small radio for her mother. Ada ran out and hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. She didn't care where he went, only that he came back. One evening, Ada asked, "What exactly do you do for a living?" Femi smiled nervously and said, "Let's just say I used to clean big offices." She giggled and said, "You're the best cleaner I've ever met." He looked away, knowing the truth would change everything. The next day, Madame Ronke came to Ada's compound in a chauffeur-driven car. She stepped down, looking around with clear disgust. Ada came out confused, wiping her hands on her wrapper. Madame Ronke said coldly, "So you're the one my son threw his future away for." Ada stood still, but her heart was racing. She said politely, "Good afternoon, ma." Madame Ronke looked her up and down and said, "You don't belong in our world." Ada replied softly, "Love doesn't care about world, ma." That night, Ada cried alone in her small room. She knew she didn't fit into Femi's rich world, but she loved him deeply. Her mother sat beside her, rubbing her back gently. She said, "If it's real love, it will survive anything." Femi returned the next morning, angry with his mother. He shouted, "You had no right to go there." Madame Ronke said, "I'm saving you from shame." But Femi replied, "Ada is my pride, not shame." Femi drove back to Ada's place and knelt before her. "Forgive my family," he said. "I choose you." Ada pulled him up with teary eyes and hugged him tightly. That hug said everything. She forgave him. From that day, Femi kept visiting daily, helping Ada's mother with medicine. He cleaned, cooked, and even repaired the leaking roof. Neighbors started respecting him more, even without knowing who he really was. To them, he was just a kind, poor man in love. One Saturday, Femi invited Ada to visit a place with him. She wore her best Ankara gown, looking shy and beautiful. They entered a black SUV, and the driver greeted Femi as "Sir." Ada looked confused but said nothing. They arrived at a tall glass building in Victoria Island. Femi said, "This is where I work." He led her to the top floor, the CEO's office. Ada looked around, speechless. Ada slowly walked into the beautiful office. The chairs were made of leather, and golden frames hung on the wall. Femi walked to the big chair behind the desk and sat down. He smiled at her and said, "I own this place."
Ada shook her head in disbelief. "You lied to me all this time?" she asked, her voice shaking. Femi stood up and held her shoulders gently. "I wanted to know if someone could love me without my money." Ada walked to the window and stared out. She was silent for a long time, then whispered, "So you tested me?" Femi replied, "I was scared. I've been used before." Ada turned to him, eyes full of pain. "I'm not like those other women," Ada said firmly. "I loved you when you were a cleaner, not a king." Femi took her hand and said, "That's why you're my queen." Tears ran down both their faces. Femi took Ada to meet the board members. They were shocked to see her, but Femi introduced her with pride. "She's the woman I love, and she'll help manage our charity foundation." Everyone clapped, though some still whispered. That evening, Madame Ronke watched the news on TV. A picture of Femi and Ada at a charity event filled the screen. She sighed deeply, then smiled softly. "She truly makes him happy," she whispered to herself. Weeks passed and Ada remains the same humble girl, even after moving into Femi's mansion. One sunny Saturday, she returned to her old compound with food items, gifts, and a big smile. She gave out rice, beans, oil, and even helped some neighbors pay their rent. From the window of their old room, her mother watched with tears of joy.
smiling at how far her daughter had come. After the neighbors received their gifts, Ada's mother slowly stepped outside. She wore a clean wrapper and head tie, her face glowing with pride. She hugged Ada tightly in front of everyone and said, "You did not forget where you came from." The whole compound clapped as mother and daughter wept in each other's arms. That evening, Ada sat on a wooden bench with her mother under the mango tree. They talked about the past, the hunger, the struggles, and the prayers that kept them going. Her mother held her hand and whispered, "You are my answered prayer." Ada rested her head on her mother's shoulder, tears silently falling. The next day, Femi invited Ada and her mother to a big charity event in Victoria Island. He proudly introduced them to government officials, business leaders, and the press. Ada stayed quiet and humble, while her mother beamed with joy. Femi held Ada's hand and announced that she would lead his new charity for widows and orphans. Later that night, Femi and Ada sat on the rooftop of his mansion. The city lights sparkled below as they shared a quiet moment together. "I never thought I'd find love where I least expected," Femi said, holding her close. Ada smiled and replied, "Love doesn't care about money. It only cares about the heart." The next morning, Femi surprised Ada with a ring inside a small box made of local wood. "I don't need a queen from a palace. I need the queen who served me amala," with a smile. Ada cried, nodded, and whispered, "Yes, Femi. Yes." Soon, wedding plans began, but not the usual lavish one. Ada insisted on something simple, something real, a wedding in the church she grew up in. Femi agreed and said, "This wedding is not for the world. It's for our souls." They held hands and prayed together that night.
Ada's wedding dress was sewn by a local tailor in Surulere, just the way she wanted it, simple and graceful. Her mother helped her fix the gele as they both laughed like old times. "I never dreamt I would live to see this day," her mother whispered, holding back tears. Ada kissed her mother's forehead and said, "You made it possible, Mama." The wedding was held in a small church in Yaba, with white plastic chairs and the ceiling fans. Ada walked down the aisle, not with a fancy crowd, but surrounded by real people who loved her. Femi stood at the altar, tears in his eyes as he watched her. It was a wedding full of joy, prayers, and pure hearts. During the reception at a community hall, they danced to old-school high-life music. Even the compound children, who once begged for food, were now dancing in new clothes Ada gave them. Femi and Ada shared their first dance like best friends who had been through everything together. Everyone cheered, not for money, but for true love and kindness. Later that night, Ada and Femi sat quietly on their bed, both dressed down, shoes off, no makeup, no crowd, just the two of them, tired but deeply fulfilled. Femi said, "This is what peace feels like." Ada nodded and replied, "We built it together." Ada and Femi began a charity in Ajagunle to help single mothers and jobless youth. They didn't announce it on TV. They just started small. One sewing machine, one tray of groundnut. "I know how it feels to beg for food," Ada told a young girl, "but I also know how to rise." The girl hugged her tightly, with hope in her eyes. Femi's business partners were shocked when he introduced Ada as his wife. They whispered, "She was just a food server." But Femi raised his hand and said, "She's my queen." One of the men smiled and said, "If she tamed you, she must be powerful." Ada just smiled and said, "Real power is in love." Ada sat on her balcony one evening, staring at the sky as her baby kicked softly inside her. She whispered, "You'll be born into love, not lack." Femi brought her a bowl of fresh mangoes and kissed her cheek. Even in silence, their hearts spoke loudly. News blogs finally picked up their love story and called it The Billionaire and the Canteen Girl. Some said it was fake, others said it was luck, but Femi and Ada didn't reply. They were too busy living, loving, and giving. In the end, real love doesn't shout, it shines. On their anniversary, Femi gave Ada an old framed photo of her first day at the canteen. He said, "I knew from that day that I had found something money couldn't buy." Ada cried again, not because of pain this time, but because she was full.
Love had taken her from begging for leftovers to being someone's answered prayer. Years passed, and Ada now ran a training school for young girls in Oshodi. She taught them catering, sewing, and how to speak with confidence. "My story is not for pity," she told them. "It's proof that pain has purpose." The girls clapped for her with teary eyes and open hearts. Femi turned one of his estates into free housing for widows and displaced families. He said, "I was raised by a single mother. Now I help others like her find shelter." A widow broke down in tears, holding his hand and praying for him. Femi wiped his own tears silently. Ada gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, and named them Grace and Glory. She held them close and whispered, "You're born from struggle, but raised in love." Femi knelt beside her, speechless and weeping with joy. Their home was now complete. One day, a struggling girl approached Ada and said, "Ma, I want to be like you." Ada smiled and replied, "Don't be like me, be better. Let me show you how." She took the girl in like a sister and trained her personally. That girl later opened her own canteen and named it Hope. Femi and Ada were invited to speak at a youth empowerment summit in Abuja. They told their story to thousands of young Nigerians. "You don't need to be born rich to have a rich future," Femi said. The crowd stood up in thunderous applause, many in tears. Later that night, they sat by a campfire in their backyard. Femi said, "We turned our pain into a platform." And Ada replied, "And our scars into stars." The fire crackled softly as they watched the sky, full of peace. Their twins grew into kind and humble children who helped serve at Ada's place. Even though they were born into wealth, they were trained in service. One customer asked, "Are these really Femi's children?" "Yes," Ada smiled, "but they're also mine, and I raised them with roots." Years later, someone asked Ada, "What is the secret to your joy?" She smiled and answered, "I stopped chasing gold and started watering love." She looked around at all she built, all she gave, and all she became. Then she turned and walked into the kitchen, still serving, still shining. The girl who once had nothing but a plastic plate now owned a life of peace, purpose, and love. Not because she found a rich man, but because she never lost her kind heart. And Femi, the billionaire, found not gold, but treasure in humility. In the end, true wealth isn't in your bank, it's in your heart. Thank you so much for watching this touching story of love, humility, and true wealth. If this story inspired you, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Your support keeps these stories alive.